So far on this journey, we have talked a great deal about the concept of nutrients. So, just to recap, some of the nutrients we need in large amounts, those are called macronutrients. The ones that we need in smaller amounts are called micronutrients. The macronutrients, in particular, are things like carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. They directly provide our body with energy and also contribute to the different structures of our body and a lot of the different processes that take place. Micronutrients, on the other hand, are things like vitamins and minerals. They don't directly provide our body with any energy, but they are essential to making different functions happen. Ultimately, when our body gets all of the different nutrients that it needs, the total types and amount of energy, as well as the different vitamins and minerals, we experience growth, development, healing, and so much more. We've identified that every food provides some kind of beneficial element, but there's no food that provides everything of what we need in a given day. So it's our job to put together different foods based upon what's available to us as well as what our preferences are to help meet our overall nutrient needs. In this particular lesson, we are going to dive into a macronutrient, in particular carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are a very hot topic in our society, and as a result, there are a lot of misconceptions and misunderstandings about the role that they play in our overall health and well being. So let's make sure that we're on the right page. When we're speaking about carbohydrates in this lesson, we're referring to the chemistry that's found in different foods. We're not necessarily referring to just one food group. There are three primary types of carbohydrate that are found in our food. Those are things like starch, sugar, and fiber. Now, each one of these types of carbohydrate have further subtypes and kind of sub classifications and categories. But every single one of them are made out of the elements of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Those molecules come together to create what we call sugar molecules, which are glucose, fructose, and galactose. Those sugars come together to create varying lengths and different bonds that ultimately make up the different types of carbohydrate of sugar, starch, and fiber. So, all carbohydrates have the exact same building blocks. They're all made out of the same sugar molecules. But the length and the of the chain and the complexity of the bond is what really differs between the different types. That doesn't make any of them good or bad, but rather they each have a very different purpose as a result. The different types of carbohydrate are found in plant based foods. So, fruits, vegetables, grains, beans, lentils, all examples of things that come from plants and have carbohydrate in them in some degree. Some dairy products also have carbohydrate. Things like milk and yogurt are some examples. Carbohydrates are not found in any animal products. So they are not found in things like chicken, turkey, fish, beef, eggs. There's no carbohydrate in those particular foods. As mentioned previously, there's three types of carbohydrate, and our body interacts with each of them differently. The three types are sugar, starch, and fiber. As we discussed last time, they're all made of the same molecules, but they really vary in terms of the length of the chain, as well as the different chemical bonds that kind of bring it all together. Sugars are very short. They only have two sugar molecules attached with a single bond, and that makes it very easy for our body to interact with sugar and turn it into energy for the cells. Sugars can be naturally occurring in food. So they are found in things like fruit, milk, and yogurt. And they're also the primary chemistry of sweeteners or added sugars, things like honey, granulated sugar, powdered sugar, brown sugar, agave, just to name a few. And we're going to learn a little bit more about sugar in our next lesson. Fibers are a component found in fruits, vegetables, as well as the outer layer of grains called the bran layer. Fibers are somewhere between 3 to 10 sugar molecules long. And what really makes them different is that they have they're put together in such a way and with such a chemistry that our body cannot actually break them down and turn them into blood glucose to be used as energy by our cells. As a result, fiber goes through the body largely undigested. And as a result, has a lot of beneficial properties to it as well. But fiber does not actually provide our body with energy. Starches are the longest chain of carbohydrate. They have anywhere from 10 or more sugar molecules put together. And they have a structure that's kind of very similar to the sugars that we talked about earlier, the first one that we talked about. As a result, our body turns it into blood glucose, which is used by energy for our cells. But because the chain is longer than the simple sugars, if you will, they take longer to convert to energy relative to sugar. Carbohydrates are an essential nutrient that our body needs to function and to function well. Some of those benefits come from the actual structure of the carbohydrate itself, so the chemical makeup and how our body interacts with that chemical makeup. Some of the benefits also come from the foods that are rich in carbohydrates, and so those foods tend to have other really beneficial properties for our body. Starch and sugar are both converted into something called blood glucose. Some people also call blood glucose blood sugar. It's the same thing, different name. Blood glucose is the preferred energy source for every single cell in your body, and it's what our body uses to carry out different metabolic processes. Blood glucose is so essential that our body tightly monitors how much blood sugar is available in our bloodstream at any given time. The body also has really intricate storage and backup systems just in case those levels get a little bit too low, that it can bring it back up to where it needs to function. Our brain and our nervous system, in particular, have a very strong preference for blood glucose as its fuel source. Our brain and nervous system use somewhere upwards of like 120 grams of blood glucose every single day. Our nerve cells and chemical messengers all use glucose to process information. Additionally, blood glucose is needed to create different neurotransmitters in the body. So, if we don't have enough carbohydrate in what we eat and available in our bloodstream, it can greatly affect our overall mood, our mental health, our ability to concentrate, as well as just process information and remember things. There are other systems in the body, of course. We're not just a brain and nervous system. And those other systems can kind of get away with different energy sources and convert them into the energy that it needs. But they often still rely upon some presence of blood glucose to convert those other sources of energy into usable fuel. Moreover, blood glucose is a primary fuel source for active muscles. The harder a body works, also known as like the higher your heart rate goes, the more your muscles are really depending upon blood glucose as their fuel source. So, this is especially true for sprinting, lifting weights, any type of power activity. It's also true for people who are moving longer distance or endurance athletes. If there's not enough blood glucose available, the body will break down muscle to try to meet some of its energy needs. And if we're breaking down muscle, we're ultimately stalling out our performance and adaptation. So, having enough carbohydrate in our diet can actually really enhance our performance potential and help our muscles stay strong and adapt to what we're trying to get them to do. Foods that are rich in carbohydrates also tend to have a wealth of other nutrients. Most carbohydrate rich foods come from plants, as I mentioned. It can be different parts of the plant. Sometimes it's the stem, the leaves, the root, the fruit. It could be the grain, and more. These different parts of the plant all have different properties and makeup. It might be some parts of the plant are rich in things called antioxidants, and those antioxidants protect our cells against cellular damage. Some parts of the plant are also really rich in fiber, as we mentioned, and that helps keep our gastrointestinal system clear and clean, and overall helps us stay healthy and well. They can also be rich in a variety of essential vitamins and minerals, things like vitamin A, E, K, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and so much more. Beans and lentils, which are like a part of the grain, part of the plant, if you will, not only provide starch and fiber, but are also a source of amino acids and protein. Nuts and seeds are another rich source of dietary fat, along with some protein, fiber, and starch. Carbohydrates are also found in some dairy products, as we mentioned, things like milk, yogurt, and ice cream. And those products also provide other nutrients, such as protein, dietary fat, as well as some vitamins and minerals. So, carbohydrates have a lot of essential and very important functions within our body. They're not bad, they're crucial, not only for our health, but our overall well being. People can get a little bit caught up in carbohydrates, especially in terms of how they might affect hunger patterns. And sometimes that can kind of scare people. And so you might hear people talking about things like simple and complex carbs, and that one might be better than another. But there's some gray area there. It's a bit of a misconception. Carbohydrates do indeed really range in terms of their chemical complexity, as we just learned. There are some carbohydrates with very simple structures, aka the simple sugars or sweeteners, and there are others with more complex and even longer structures. That doesn't make them better or worse, just different. And depending what you need your food to do for you, you might choose something different. So for example, if you need a readily available source of energy, it would make sense to choose something that is more simple, that would allow the carbohydrate to quickly get turned into blood glucose and then enter the bloodstream, and then go to your muscles and your brain to provide energy for those cells. If you needed energy quick, having something with a lot of fiber, fat, or protein would not make sense because you'd get less energy and at a slower rate. On the flip side, if you needed more sustained energy and you didn't really need it at that quick rate, you might opt for something with more starch and fiber rather than something that's based in more sugar. The faster a food is digested and absorbed by different systems, the sooner we're going to experience hunger signals. That's not bad, it's absolutely functional. But if we're largely relying upon simple carbohydrates for our energy needs, yeah, we're going to be hungry sooner relative to if we had had something with a little bit more complex chemistry that takes longer for our body to digest, metabolize, and absorb. It's not a bad thing to have simple carbohydrates, and it's not that you can't have simple carbohydrates if you don't need energy quickly. But so just keep in mind that what we learned earlier, our job is to combine different foods to get our nutrient needs. So you could achieve that same sustained energy level by having a simple carbohydrate and simply pairing it with other sources of energy that have more fiber, fat, or protein. And that would still, your body would experience it in the exact same way. So it doesn't matter about like the food itself. What matters are the combinations of foods that we put together to meet our overall energy needs. So let's get started. In this lesson, we're going to explore more about what carbohydrates do for our body and how they impact us. In the next lesson, we're going to dig more into the different types of carbohydrate to better understand this whole idea of sugar, fiber, and starch. Stay tuned.